talk now, though, about Brexit with Jason Hunter, who's a former international trade negotiator. And Jason, morning to you. First of all, can I ask you about Japan and Stilton?
Well, you certainly may. It's not pretty there, is it, at the moment? The first thing I would say, Penny, is don't believe a single word that's coming out of the UK government's press machine. If you look at the Japan trade deal, we're blaming it on Stilton cheese. Let's bear in mind that 7 out of 10 Japanese people are lactose intolerant. So it's not a great market for our cheeses anyway. Secondly, our exports to Japan for blue cheese are about £100,000 compared to the billions upon billions of pounds worth of exports of other products that we sell to Japan. And the UK government expect us to believe that in a power move, Liz Truss walked away from an incredibly important trade deal with one of our top 15 global export destinations because of £100,000 worth of blue cheese per year. That's what they're asking us to believe in the UK. It's absolutely shocking. And if you look at all of our exports, sorry.
I was going to say, I think we've seen a similar direction before when we talked about things like Welsh lamb and the Japanese consumption versus the EU that would be lost, for example.
Yes, indeed. I mean, talking about lamb, and the New Zealand's Deputy Prime Minister came out with a great quote this week. He compared the trade talks to the Ashes. He said, Britain is so unprepared in trade talks. We're so inexperienced over the last 30 years. It's like turning up to play cricket against Australia with no experience in the Ashes. But,
and that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, that's the problem at the moment is that we haven't needed to because we've been part of the EU.
Indeed. I mean, it's actually been quite a good service because we didn't take part heavily in the EU trade talks with all of the trade deals we have all over the world. But basically we said, look, this is what we want. Can you go and sort it out for us? They were almost our servants. And yet we're told by the Brexiteers that the EU were in charge of us. 73% of all of our exports all around the world, that's over £1 billion a day, are sold to just 15 countries. Currently, we're not even close to a trade deal with any of those 15 countries, which include, obviously, the EU as our largest trade partner. The United States is our second trade partner. Now, while we don't have a trade agreement with the United States between the EU and the US, what we do have are a list of 28 pages of what's called MRAs, or mutual recognition agreements, which make trade much, much easier between the United States and the continent of Europe. Just the list is 28 pages, headlines of the titles of each of the different documents. So far, the United Kingdom has been able to replicate 3 of those 23 lines of those 28 pages of 04. That's how far behind we are. Robert Lighthizer, the US Trade or Commerce Secretary, he said a few months ago that there's no possible way that we can complete a UK-US trade deal by the end of this year. There's absolutely no way. He said that months ago. Just a few weeks ago, the UK government decided that they're going to make the announcement, and it's all over the press, that the UK say, we don't think we're going to be able to get a trade deal with the US this year. And he said, well, hang on, the Americans said that months ago. And the reason why we're having problems with Japan, and it's the same problem we're going to have with any other country the United Kingdom wants to have a trade deal with, is we make part finished goods or part assembled goods that we then want to export to Japan. Japan will add value by finishing those goods and make them complete, and then they will want to ship those products to the European Union under their tariff-free arrangement, which was the largest global trade deal in history. They won't be able to do that if the United Kingdom decides to have different standards, different regulations, different safety regulations to the European Union, because the EU won't accept something where the standards are different. Say we make brake parts, for example. We make brakes for a Nissan car, which we then ship to Japan. They put on their vehicles. If those brake parts safety standards are different to the EU's, Japan won't be able to then sell that product back into the European Union because they can't guarantee the safety of the brakes on the vehicle. And this is the same with food, with any other manufactured product you can imagine. So Japan will have to make a choice. Do we want to continue being able to sell and export to the European Union tariff-free? Or do we want to have this trade deal with the United Kingdom where the UK is saying they do not want a level playing field with the European Union in standards and safety and regulation, employment rights, environmental rights, etc., and state aid? Now, every other country will have to make that decision. Do they want this trade deal with the United Kingdom, or do they want it with the European Union? And I know which way they're going to go, and so does everybody else. And that was the stumbling block between the Japan-EU UK trade talk. It was nothing whatsoever to do with blue cheese.
So when we think about specific things like that, regulations and what the EU's, in some cases, protections would be as well, I'm thinking of food and drink here and the way that things like Scotch as whisky, and that's, I believe, about 20% of the entire UK's food and drink export. Is there a risk of undermining, Cornish pasties, Scotch whisky as sort of protected trademarks that can only be described as such if they have been produced in the certain parts of the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are called what's called geographical indicators, and there are hundreds of them. It's not just Cornish pasties and Scottish whisky and things. And we had a mutual recognition with the European Union so that we could not make champagne in a bath in Bradford, and they couldn't make a Cornish pasty in Dordogne in France. And those were mutually recognised and protected. Now, in that great deal that Boris Johnson signed and negotiated, remember he was touting it everywhere. It's a great deal. We have to sign this withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. I've negotiated it. It's wonderful. What happened in that is he's agreed to recognise the European Union's geographical indicators in perpetuity forever. But he forgot to ask to be included in the withdrawal agreement protection for the UK's geographical indicators. So that means we cannot make champagne in a bath in Bradford, but anybody across the EU, our geographical indicators are no longer protected. And when Boris Johnson went back and said, oh, sorry, I forgot to add that bit in, can we just open up that withdrawal agreement again? And they said, no, it's done, it's signed, you've signed it, you've agreed it. And that's one example of the incompetent level of the people negotiating our trade deals within Westminster right now.
You said, can I come back to this point though, Jason, that you said about the fact that about safety and security and about brake parts being sent perhaps to Japan and then being inserted in cars, and if we don't have a flat rate across the EU, but not flat rate, but a flat law about safety standards, that's not affected by things like employment rights. That doesn't affect how the brake parts come out. Surely even I could actually negotiate a deal where you say, listen, we're keeping the same standards as the EU, as we always have done, but what we're going to change is other things.
That's the problem, Penny. Most trade negotiations, you have two countries that start in different places with different sets of standards and different sets of regulations across the board for everything. And what you do during the negotiation is you come to a mutual recognition where you set a level and say, look, we're not going to go beneath that level, but as independent sovereign countries or organized sovereign trade blocs, we will agree that that's the minimum, but we can increase it if we want to. And that's a lot of that has happened, in fact, with the UK-EU relationship, is the EU have a flat standard, and in some cases we've actually increased those safety standards within the United Kingdom through the Health and Safety Executive. What the UK is saying as part of our negotiations with the European Union is we don't want to do that anymore. We want to be able to diverge away from our current standards, but we're not going to tell you which standards we want to change. We're not going to tell you whether it's employment rights. We're not going to tell you whether it's state subsidies for industries. We're not going to tell you whether it's employment or the environment. So how the EU can then give us a formal, comprehensive free trade arrangement on the basis that we're not even going to keep the minimum standards in the future, that puts us in because the EU is very difficult.
But that's what I'm saying, Jason. But that's what I'm saying is the fact that, these sort of things, if it's just about our trade, then what does it matter? Whether our employment rights have changed, whether we do anything differently, as long as the eventual thing that we're flogging is either the same or better than it has been already.
But that's exactly what we have right now. But what the UK is saying is, in order for us to get a trade deal with America, for example, the Americans are telling us that we have to have ractosine in our pork, which is like a chemical hormone growth thing. We could be importing chlorinified chicken. If we bring that into the country, into the United Kingdom, we then make, I don't know, say a ready meal, a chicken curry. How does the EU know that chicken curry that we're selling to the European Union, how do they know that chicken is up to the safety standards of the European Union? If we may have imported some of the chicken from America, which is substandard, we may have our own chickens, which are higher level. And the world is very, very integrated. Not only do we have the question about the safety of the chicken, but also the tariffs in that final ready meal, because we may have imported some vegetables from the Far East, which have a tariff regime with the European Union and no free trade deal. So we import that into the UK, and that forms a part of the final product we then ship to the EU. And the EU we then have to calculate how much of that product is within the trade relationship between the UK and the European Union, and how much of it is from a tariff country to the European Union. And it just makes every single thing we export incredibly difficult to calculate and very expensive. When you make things difficult in business, they become more expensive. And the more expensive they become, the lower profits you have, and the lower profits you have, the higher the cost for the United Kingdom. And that's going to
maybe it would be easier to try to change the way that America does business, and to try to make it so that they're more environmentally and ecologically friendly towards animals. My producer Kaz just said that her friend went to the US once and ate a chocolate cake that said contains less than 8% pork. So you've got all those sort of...
I know some of their chocolate rules allow a certain percentage of inclusion of things like cockroaches and insects. I forget which particular brand it is, and I wouldn't name them on the radio anyway. But if you look at the ingredients, it says contains up to X% insect parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, full of protein, mind you, some insects. Of course, we should look at that side. And I suppose you could say maybe it's gelatin from pork as a thickening agent, or whatever. As you say, the whole thing is extraordinarily complicated, and it's been more complicated by COVID, because that's the other thing, isn't it? Is that actually everything's been slightly put on hold because of people. It's been all hands to the pumps, hasn't it?
Very much so. I mean, and that's critical. That's a global issue, and everybody in the world is facing that same problem. And the UK, it seems, we want to distance ourselves from any kind of help whatsoever. I mean, just last year, the US Medicals Agency signed another memorandum of mutual recognition agreement with the European Medicines Agency. That's the European Medicines Agency that used to be in London, which does type approvals on various types of medication, pharmaceuticals. The EMA isn't in London anymore. It's already left the UK as a result of Brexit. We've already said that we're not going to be a part of that anymore. And the same as we're not going to be a part of the European Aviation Safety Agency, which allows planes to fly safely from the United Kingdom into EU airspace. But on that specific thing on the EMA, all of the main medicines and pharmaceuticals in the world are going to have issues trying to get into the United Kingdom, because we don't know what the new regulations will be for the UK yet. And we're 5 months away from this happening. Day one, the government announced 2 weeks ago, they've written to all big pharma companies who manufacture medicines saying, please, can you start stockpiling ready for January the 1st? And the pharmaceutical companies are saying, well, no, we can't because of COVID. And a lot of medicines you cannot stockpile because they've got a short shelf life of days or even weeks. If you cannot stockpile...
I'm sure Brexiteers at this moment, Jason, will be shouting at the radio and saying, I bet he's a Ramona.
Well, the thing is, all I'm doing is quoting this Brexiteer government, led by Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Dominic Raab. All the chief Brexiteers are in government, and I'm just relaying what the Brexiteers are now telling us.
Jason, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. That's Jason Hunter, who's a former international trade negotiator. The time is 20 minutes past 8. We're talking